role in the Break Free from Plastics Pledge process, that would be great. And we'll start with Sue.
Thank you so much. It is an absolute pleasure to be here. My name is Sue Fassler. I use she, her pronouns, and I work as the Sustainable Facilities Manager at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. So that's located in Syracuse, New York. And as part of my role, and I can definitely touch more on this, I manage a large section, or I like to say advocate for, a large section of our operations, including custodial, grounds, mailroom, stockroom, shipping, receiving, and the fleet garage. And I'm also helping to lead up our zero waste program, which is, of course, my favorite.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being here. And then Katrina and Ellie.
Hello. We are both so excited to be here with you all this evening. I'm Ellie. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a third year at College of the Atlantic. Katrina and I co-chair the Campus Committee for Sustainability here at COA, and we were both kind of at the forefront for getting the Break Free from Plastic Pledge passed and beginning to be implemented here at COA.
That's all right. Hi, I'm Katrina. I'm also very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you both so much. And Sabina.
Hi, I'm Sabina. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am the student lead for the single-use plastic elimination policy at UC Berkeley, University of California, Berkeley. Unlike I think a lot of the other panelists, I was not super involved with the advocacy and the passage of this single-use plastic elimination policy, but my role is mainly on the implementation side. So creating and developing a concrete roadmap and timeline for various campus departments and entities to use as a reference when developing waste reduction programs. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Okay, great. So like I mentioned, I'll just start with some broad questions, but definitely feel free to start thinking of what you want to ask and go ahead and put it in the chat. So first, like Young mentioned, this is a really big project and it's huge and requires a lot of moving parts and a pretty lengthy timeline for a lot of folks. So I wanted to just start broad and ask what all of your biggest challenges were working on the Break Free from Plastics Pledge process, getting it signed. Or for Sabina and folks who maybe didn't do so much with the advocacy, what is your biggest challenge now that you're facing with implementation? But let's go ahead and start with Sabina.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so I can't speak much to the passage of the policy, but I actually spoke with Nicole Haynes, who was our UC Berkeley chapter chair of CalPERG, and really spearheaded this policy. I actually reached out to her just so I'd have some words of wisdom on this from her experience. And I think it also kind of corresponds with what I would say was one of the biggest challenges, is just getting all the different various stakeholders and entities on campus on board with this policy. So in terms of my role and what's been the biggest challenge, I would say that coordination of all the different various groups involved, because our campus's policy is really all encompassing and it can be broken into 10 different sectors. That's office supplies, food service, retail, labs, universal waste, e-waste, facilities, athletics. It really, it spans over the entire campus, not just the physical campus, but the campus community. So really figuring out how to coordinate with all the different, not only campus departments, but partners and suppliers and manufacturers that we partner with and we have contracts with. Coordinating all of those and being able to, establish and maintain relationships with those various folks and departments, I think was the biggest challenge, but I'd also say is the most important thing when implementing any policy, is that relationship building, because it's the most important thing is having people on your side and having people on board with this policy going forward, so that it's easier to develop new programming and you don't have to reinvent the wheel every time. So yeah, I would say that was the biggest challenge for me.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. We had a similar struggle of just coordinating so many different people, and I go to school with 1,800 people, so I can't even imagine what it was like at the UC system. But Katrina and Ellie, what about you guys?
Hi, so our school, College of the Atlantic, is 350 students, so that's even smaller. So once we got the idea of the pledge came after Ellie and a few other people had been to Zero Waste Conference. So Ellie and I have been co-chairing our campus committee for sustainability for a couple of years now, and so we were already quite aware of the governance system at our school, and we had connections to the president at our school and the people in charge of our buildings and grounds and the people in charge of our waste. We call waste discarded resources at Zero. So the people who navigate the waste streams, we also had close relationships to already. So bringing through the pledge was tapping into that governance structure and holding some open forums where we let people look at and criticize and talk to us about what it would mean for the school to sign this pledge. And then finally, it was brought to something we call the all college meeting, where everybody can show up and vote, and it was voted on unanimously. So actually, the first steps of getting it through, they were quite easy for us.
Yeah, I think we're probably a bad example in this situation of like the biggest challenge, because we're so fortunate that we already had policies regarding like our discarded resources, and the Breakthrough from Plastic Pledge just kind of like fit into this policy super nicely that we already had, and just kind of encouraged further work for us all. Yeah. We can speak more to that later.
Yes, well, it still serves as a really great example and a model for us to all follow. But I think what you both mentioned about having the public forums was really helpful, and something that we also did at Eckerd and people really appreciated. And then that just helped form relationships, and was actually something we weren't prioritizing, but something we should have prioritized more. So that's a good note. And then Sue.
Sure. So I have to say, I'm also a former ESF student, and you're all so far ahead of where I was as a student. So that gives me a lot of hope for the future. But I could foresee me as a student having a lot of trouble identifying who those key players are to bring to the table. So I think it's really phenomenal that you already had an understanding of the governance structure at your college or university. So I think that's a really key important step. And also to include the operations staff, like your custodial division and your grounds crew, and the business office right from the start, because a lot of that purchasing focuses through the business office. So those are kind of the under the radar forgotten groups that usually aren't tied in until it's like, oh, by the way, we signed this, now you have to get on board. And that's a way to breed resentment. So I'm similar in that at ESF, everything we do is pretty much focused on the environment. It's right baked into our college name, the Environmental Science and Forestry School. So it really made a lot of sense for us to sign this pledge. So there wasn't a lot of difficulty in doing that, but the difficulty now comes in implementation, because like a lot of colleges, especially small colleges, so many people wear different hats. That includes the students, the faculty, and the staff. So everyone is doing 25 different things at one time. So it can be really difficult to get anyone's attention. So I always like to say, I'm the happy pest. Like, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to bug you. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to follow up to get this information, but I try to do it in a way that's very personable. And I think that's a really big part of this advocacy, right? Is learning how to meet people on their level and be willing to have the same conversations over and over and over again, and always assuming that people might not know or have the passion that you might have. So segueing to our current biggest challenges, I'm gonna look this way on my other screen because I wrote some notes. Thin film plastic is a huge major issue. I don't need to dig into this now because maybe we'll want to later, but managing our thin film plastic that we aren't able to reduce at the source is a big key right now. Our low hanging fruit is gone. So our campus cafes, we don't have a reusable program. I can get more into that, but we do have everything that is to go is compostable. It's not the best option, but we don't have a lot of single-use plastics there. And we have campus-wide composting. So a lot of this low-hanging fruit is gone. So now the issue is, how do we identify what the more difficult things are? And a lot of those things necessitate a higher level response from either the college, the state, the region, or the federal government. Because as much as we want to change the packaging that we bring on campus, for instance, we as a tiny little state institution of maybe 1,800 students don't have the power to say, hey, Amazon, change your packaging. That's where we can bind together as a 64 campus SUNY system, or even the state in New York State right now, there's EPR, extended producer responsibility legislation. We can lend our voice and advocacy there. So I know I'm going real deep, but so right now at ESF, we're looking past the low-hanging fruit as how do we really dig in and force that higher level change.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And thank you for touching on that. And I think it gets into the bigger picture of student power and recognizing that students can make change in our campuses, within our campuses, also influence our communities. And then it just spreads and it's wonderful. So that's a really great point. And a perfect segue to the next question. So thinking pre-COVID world, what was your biggest challenge with implementation? Would love to pick your brains about that. And then Sue, we can start with you if you have anything to add regarding implementation.
Do you want me to dig into thin film a little bit, or is that
Yeah, go for it.
So I'm just learning this in the last few weeks because so our Break Free from Plastic Committee, which is part of the pledge that we signed, which I love, is made up of students, faculty, and staff. So we got together and just created this huge brain dump on a Google Doc and said, what is every single-use plastic that annoys us on campus that we would want to try to remove or replace? And a lot of the big ones were thin film plastic. So things in the Trailhead Cafe, if the food comes frozen, that food packaging and shipping and receiving, there's the pallet shrink wrap, there's all those plastic bubbles from packaging, and then we have our disposable gloves. So those are our key areas we're focusing on now. And I'm realizing, like, obviously they can't go in a traditional recycling stream. So I've had to start talking to our hauler and even some of the materials recovery facilities to say, hey, if we can source separate this pallet shrink wrap, because that shrink wrap is a different type of plastic than your frozen food packaging. So even if I find someone who can take the pallet shrink wrap, they might not take that other packaging. So it's calling every different recovery facility in the area and saying, will you accept this material if we can get it to you? Now the question will be, does our ground staff have the capacity to bring things there? So that's now we're going to get creative and start reaching out to local grocery stores like Wegmans or a Tops and saying, can we piggyback on the thin film plastic that you already do all that recycling? So thin film plastics is way more complex. I thought it would be, hey, just a turnkey solution. If I can manage one thin film, I can manage them all. And it's like 3 or 4 different streams. So I think that is the biggest thing, besides things not being in our control. Like, we really can't limit a lot of the packaging coming to campus.
Thank you for sharing that. Everyone keep an eye out for thin film plastics ahead of time. And then Sabina, if you wanted to go ahead and talk a little about your implementation challenges.
Yeah, sure. So I already kind of touched on one of the major challenges, at least for me, which is just building those initial relationships with stakeholders. And like Sue was saying, those relationships with procurement and business operations, because those are really where a lot of the higher level contractual change is made. And I guess just speaking more like the student perspective of this, I didn't have a lot of experience with policy before this. My role last year within the Student Environmental Resource Center, I was a green team associate. I worked on a lot of operational level things, buildings, waste streams, more on the downstream level, figuring out how to improve signage and work with our vendors. But this really entailed a lot more of that, those higher level conversations about, what are we purchasing as a campus? What are we ordering? Who are our main partners? What, looking directly at purchase orders, where's most of our PPE coming from? Where's most of our single-use plastics? What vendors are those coming from? And so I think, at least for me, the biggest challenge was just thinking on a higher level, more upstream perspective, and being able to meet with our head of procurement, chief officer of procurement, and really work on, this is a policy. And yeah, we could approach it by just picking at individual products, or we could try to set this policy as the baseline and then make anything that deviates from that an exemption. So that's actually what we're working on right now, is how do we implement or incorporate the language in this policy within Bearby. Bearby is our campus department purchasing platform where all departments, employees, staff purchase materials and products. How do we make this the baseline so that it's a requirement to not have single-use plastic and non-essential single-use plastic included in the packaging of products, but also within the individual packaging or individual container of the product itself. So getting that in the language, I think, will really change the narrative around how we approach the elimination of plastic. So then going forward, if there's a situation where, yeah, this is essential, we need to have a plastic, or we need to have some sort of single-use plastic packaging, those vendors have to, go out of their way, apply for exemption. It makes it a lot harder. So I think just changing the overall baseline of how we view purchasing and ordering is the biggest challenge. And especially, I don't have a lot of experience in this. So building and forging those new relationships is really important for me and really important for the rest of my team, so that we can have constructive discussions and and sort of meet them where they're at, and we can hold each other accountable on these issues. So yeah.
Definitely sounds like a huge challenge, but that is really exciting that you all are literally changing the standard. And I think that'll go a really long way in the long run. So that's really awesome to hear. And then Katrina and Ellie, what about you all?
Yeah, I think our biggest challenge pre-COVID with implementation was kind of a bit out of our control. We had, I think in the 2 years since we had it passed, we've had 3 different chief financial officers who were in charge of the procurement. And so every time there was a new person, it would be like a new education program with them, sitting with them and helping them understand the importance of this thing. And then finally we'd get to the point of, okay, let's actually talk about changing what we're buying. They would leave. We're having a bit of a problem with our chief financial officers, I think. But besides building those relationships and being able to implement a procurement policy to kind of, as Sabina was saying, like get it upstream, get materials upstream, we were otherwise very fortunate. And the only thing, the only material that was violating section 1 of the pledge of non-essential single-use disposable plastics was the individually packaged single-use tea bags on campus. And so we didn't have like any single-use plastic cutlery or anything like that on campus before we signed the pledge. So so our main challenge was the procurement team here.
We actually also had that challenge. Eckerd is so small that we don't have a centralized purchasing system. So we had to talk to every single person who had purchasing power, which is every single person who's employed by the college. So that took a long time.
We're the same here as well, going to every single member of faculty because they all have the credit card details. It's a challenge.
Yeah, an unexpected challenge that I personally was not prepared for. So something to keep in mind. I think Sue also mentioned getting in contact with purchasing and procurement offices really early, and that is so important when dealing with this work. So next, continuing on thinking about challenges, and yes, feel free to keep putting questions in the chat. We've been in the pandemic for so long that I think all of our schools have had to adapt and change in some way, and that definitely includes our sustainability plans. So would love to just hear how COVID-19 has impacted your progress, or maybe what adaptations you're making, just what's going on that front, to see if that could help other folks who are in a similar boat. But let's start with Katrina and Ellie this time.
So COVID kind of paused things for us a little bit here. We were working with the president of the college and buildings and grounds and the various people involved in procurement, predominantly in our canteen. We were working to create a reusables program, which we hoped would completely eradicate even compostable single-use items. But unfortunately COVID happened, and now all of our food is being delivered directly to students in their rooms in compostable packaging. And so it kind of put a pause on this. We'd had this like long game idea of kind of really stretching our capabilities, and so that was put on a pause. And I mean, I'm sure like many colleges, we've had to invest in like PPE materials, and fortunately now we're recycling those. But yeah, I think it's been quite painful to see so many of the things that we had been working so long for and had gained such momentum have now, like, our momentum is just like reaching such a brick wall in some parts. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. But I must be extremely frustrating to see. And let's go to Sue next.
All right. I agree. It's been really disheartening to see so many more single-use plastics, but we have to remember, of course, that's the plastics industry saying that reusable isn't safe and that only plastic is safe. So I'm hoping it'll help to kind of create a fire and make people realize like we're up against something powerful and we can fight back. So every time I see more and more single-use plastics, I just get angry and it makes me want to work harder. So that's how I've internalized it. So in terms of COVID, it hasn't, beyond using like PPE, it hasn't impacted our operations right now, but I think it will a lot in the future because kind of the power of my position is that I'm grounded in the sustainability division, but also operations. So I mentioned that I advocate for the custodial and ground staff. So whereas maybe if there wasn't someone who wasn't so transparently passionate about zero waste, maybe it would have fallen off the custodial and grounds radar because there are so many other things to worry about now. But because I'm leading those divisions, it's going to stay a front burner issue. And at ESF, we in the fall of 2019 redesigned our entire materials management infrastructure. So we have trash recycling and compost bins on every floor of every building, and we have campus-wide composting, and we really increased our budget for our waste hauler to include compost. So the best thing is during a public health crisis, you're not going to want to cut funding to your sanitation. So we got to keep our budget the same, which is not the way the whole college has been, but our waste hauler, the budget has not been cut. So where I foresee this being an issue in the future is so our Trailhead Cafe is in the Gateway Center. It's one of our newest buildings. It's a LEED building, but like with so many things, the building wasn't designed maybe thinking about operations in its entirety because the dishwashing system that was put in place isn't large enough to handle reusable containers. So that's why with our to-go program, it has to still be compostable. So the Trailhead Cafe manager and I are just starting to reinvigorate conversations about what would be needed to make a reusable program. So now I'm worried if we have to do a large scale renovation of a building that's only 6 years old, will we have the funding to do that? So I think we'll start to really see the impact of COVID in budgets over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's my big worry, that sustainability divisions will continue to see cuts. So if it's possible to tie this type of funding to your operational budget, I think that's a nice little workaround.
That's a really great point. And we were running our pledge campaign long before COVID, but one of our biggest barriers was finances because, again, it's just so small. So what we did was conduct really informal cost benefit analyses. And while we were talking to every single person with purchasing power, also tried to figure out how much money they were spending on single-use plastics and then try to find the cost up front for the reusable replacement. And we found that in every single department, they would be saving money. And that was all that our president needed to hear. And I'm sure, especially during COVID, schools are just looking for ways to save money and spend less. So if folks could do things like that, I imagine it would only help. But let's go to Sabina now.
Yeah, wow. Those are all sort of incredible ideas. I think similar to Katrine and Ellie, I think the resistance against reusables has become really apparent, especially with the pandemic. And I think our campus is sort of in a unique situation where this policy was endorsed in April of 2020, so sort of in the beginning of the COVID era. And so because of that, all of our implementation has fallen within this COVID period, and we haven't really been able to address a lot of operations at their business as usual level, and have sort of had to expand our definition of what's an essential versus a non-essential single-use plastic. And I think that's been a little bit set us back a little bit, only in the sense of, things that we as a research team and at the Student Environmental Research Center as Office of Sustainability don't necessarily believe is essential, unfortunately, for a lot of like food vendors and smaller retailers who are already very burdened financially by the pandemic. Those are essential. And I think that's been the most difficult part, is because we have this keyword, the non-essential, being more flexible with that definition. But I will say that I think what's been heartening is being able to continue having these discussions and these meetings with procurement, with the smaller food vendors, and making sure that we're letting them know that we're supporting them, and this isn't just a mandate on them and it's another thing to add on to their list of burdens, but letting them know, this is a collective goal and it's already in place. So, we have to achieve it, but, there are ways that we can do this that aren't, conducting those cost benefit analyses and making sure that we're working cooperatively and collaboratively. But yeah, I think in terms of challenges, reusables is definitely a big one. Also conducting waste audits, both physical and visual waste audits. Those have definitely been a lot difficult, and a lot of the plans that we had, especially with our labs, because we don't really have a concrete way to track a lot of our different on-campus labs waste streams. And that was one of our plans, was to conduct a waste audit. That's unfortunately not really practical or feasible right now. But yeah, I think just continuing to maintain those relationships and working, meeting, like I was saying, meeting the other vendors and especially smaller retailers and operations on a campus. That our campus is fairly large, so we have a lot of those little vendors, meeting them where they're at and making sure that this is something that we are working together on, not enforcing on them.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And I think just again brings up something that's been mentioned a couple of times, the importance of relationship building and making sure people understand why they should want to do this and not just us, exactly like you said, shoving it down people's throats, whether it be for the environmental factor, for the economic factor, really good marketing and publicity for the college, making sure that people understand their reasoning really well, I think is important now. Usually it's important, but especially right now. So I want to go to some of the questions in the chat really quickly. And again, feel free to add stuff, but we'll start with this question asking the speakers to share item lists that they've collected while researching. So let me know if I'm misinterpreting this question, but understanding the product replacements and what's needed there. Maybe if you all just want to give a quick rundown of some of the things that were highlighted are some of the standouts. And let's start with Sabina this time.
Yeah, and let me know if I think I'm interpreting this question correctly, but if not, please correct me. So in terms of like specific products or items that we've been targeting within this policy are sort of key factors. And I think we're still at the stage where we are going after some of those low-hanging fruit in the earlier stages of the policy, but while also working on those higher level contractual changes, but also focusing on what's most visible. So what are most visible product orders, whether that be like foodware accessory items, straws, utensils, I think are the most visual examples of single-use plastics that we can eliminate, but also what are our most highly purchased items. So really digging through those purchase orders from our strongest or our largest vendors. Like, for example, we get a lot of paper products from Waxy, which is like a paper product supplier that supplies actually a lot of other University of California schools. And so looking at what are our major products there and how can we either find replacements or coordinate bulk orders where it's appropriate. That's been a big point for us in terms of reduction because elimination and then reduction are our first priorities before replacement. Finding those areas where we can just eliminate unnecessary product orders. But we also have an environmentally preferred products list that we continue to update every semester. So for example, our fall 2020 environmentally preferred products list is broken into different sectors. So office supplies, labs, retail, and really also focuses on those most visible and highly purchased items. For example, within our retail operations, we have a lot of unnecessary single-use plastic that comes from Post-it note packaging or notebooks, and I think we only recently made the switch from composition notebooks to decomposition notebooks, which was I guess somewhat of an accomplishment, but there's still a lot of work to be done within retail, just in terms of individual product packaging and also shipping packaging. So I guess I don't know if that answered the question of an item list, but focusing on those most visible products, and I think the biggest one example of that is shipping packaging. So a lot of the package fillers that come, we still get packages that have
I think that's a really great point, though, about just understanding what's most used, and that you can just do by walking around campus, and looking at places, looking at what people are using on a day-to-day basis. And then Sue, if you have anything to add there.
Sure. Got my spreadsheet up. So plastic bottles in vending machines, and then plastic food containers in the vending machines. So I don't want to jump ahead in some of your questions, but we've already addressed the plastic bottle and vending machine issue. So that was a good one. Events in general. So our students are really great about lugging their mug and packing their plate. They bring their own to our ESF events, but then it's the external events. Like, I've been so dismayed sometimes where, like, I'm an alumni of ESF, and yet sometimes I go to an event and there's still single-use stuff. So it's our events coordinator is really on board with improving this. We met, I think, a week and a half ago, and we've got a nice comprehensive plan. So yeah, events are a big thing. So things like plates, cups, bowls, tablecloths, decorations, balloons, utensils, plastic name badges, then bookstore packaging, bottled water, that thin film packaging, and then going to the labs, like things like pipettes and inoculating loops and needles. So I didn't even think of that, but our students brought that up. They were like, I'm a transfer student, and at the college I came from, we used reusable inoculating loops, but at ESF, we're using single use. Why? So I have to initiate the conversation with the department chairs to see, hey, if we can do that cost benefit analysis, because I love that, and prove to you that it would be cheaper to do reusable, can we do that? And then styrofoam shipping containers. We could have a lot of live samples or like things in dry ice that still come in styrofoam. So our shipping, I didn't even know this, our shipping and receiving guy, he saves them. So if someone else has to ship something out, he uses that. So that's, I think, the big list about, oh, one last thing. So ESF's weird. We also do maple syrup tapping. So those sap lines from the maple syrup, they just get tossed in the dumpster. Don't know how to fix it, but it's cool that that made the list.
That's really exciting. I didn't know that. And then Katrina and Ellie, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, thank you. This is a good question. We have been thinking about how to answer in the most helpful way. So two of the things that we came across, as Ellie also mentioned earlier, were, so we had the tea bag issue, and then we also had we have a little vending machine where there's a lot of, in non-COVID times, you can pretty much always find free food at our campus, because all the food that's not being sold, we put it in a vending machine where you can get it for free, but our soup containers had plastic lining. So we had a lot of conversations about what would it look like to have glass containers? Who cleans them? And as you mentioned, like, then we needed to go from person to person and talk about what does the whole sequence of events look like just to get glass containers for the soup we get for free when we are hungry. So it's like it becomes some really big conversations about some very small things, and I think that has been like an ongoing topic for us, because we are a small college and everybody knows everybody, and a lot of how a school runs is based on trust and relationships. So we have taken a lot of time to have those types of conversations. Do you want to talk about the other one?
Yeah, but for the most part, we were really lucky, as I said earlier, with our discarded resource materials management policy, which was passed at COA in 2017, wherein a lot of things and item lists that I think would normally have to be created already existed. And like things like stirrers for coffee, like we use spaghetti for them and things like this.
You can eat it.
And already we had like all our cutlery in our canteen was like actual metal cutlery and ceramic plates and things. And so because this policy had already set the goal of eliminating 90% of creating making 90% of materials diverted from landfill, it meant that already we were super aware of the items and product replacements, and a lot of the low-hanging fruit had already been done So we were lucky when we arrived.
But one thing we also worked on, and this is also in the pre-COVID world, we worked a lot on, okay, we can set up rules for COA, but our campus is also used a lot for summer weddings and events and summer camps. So we had some big conversations about like, where does the extent of our school end? Like there is our relationship at the school when the students are here, but when people come from the outside, which rules can we set up and how do we negotiate with those vendors and the people who rent our lawn for a day for an ocean wedding? And so like, what does that look like? And that was a lot of big conversations that I think we'll have to take up when things go back to a state where we have more visitors.
Yeah, and I think that was especially poignant for us here because in 1 week we would have the same amount of people who normally attend the college. So it was this thing of like, okay, the summer programs are actually where a lot of our disposable materials are used.
Yeah.
That's a really great point. I didn't even think about that. But I love the spaghetti idea. Wow, that's so fun. And I'll just add at Eckerd, our biggest problem was water bottles because in Florida, you can't take people on a campus tour without giving them water. And we have the athletics department and it's a big thing. And I'll just say what worked for us was persistence. And our biggest hurdle was admissions because they had to give out water for everyone in the summer in Florida. And after talking to them for several weeks, they eventually found money in their budget to allocate towards reusable water bottles that they now just give away to every single family. At first, that money it wasn't there, but we just kept talking to them and they found the money. So sometimes it just takes persistence and continuing to build those relationships. But I really want to get to CJ's two really great questions. The first about ability and how you all are keeping accessibility at the forefront of your policies, and just seeing if you had any other tips on how to do that. Great that you're meeting with disability services and it's already in your pledge draft, so that's really awesome. But let's start with Sue for this one.
Sure. So I think that's where the power of the committee will come in because we have 25 people on the committee and everyone has a different life experience, a different path, and maybe different abilities as well. So I think it's really important to just talk to as many people as you can. Like we keep coming back to this relationship building. That's really what this is all about. And that's what sustainability is about to me as well. So I think it's, and it's even communicating the plan to campus, like, hey, we're planning on doing X, Y, Z. Would anyone like to air a concern, talk to us about it? And so something that we really struggle with is we still don't know, or I still don't know always the best way to reach people because we all get so many emails, but yet not everyone's on Facebook or people don't have an Instagram. I don't have a TikTok. So I know that's where a lot of people get their information. So how many different ways do we have to say something? Because that can be so time consuming. You spend more time figuring out how to say it and saying it in 25 different ways than you do actually spreading your message. So I think the answer to that is really, we just have to keep trying and meeting people where they are. Because I certainly don't have all the answers and I would hate to champion and fight for a policy that would have a negative impact on someone who is traditionally underrepresented or marginalized. I think that's something we really have to keep in the forefront. And we also have to talk about, you can't have the zero waste conversation without talking about environmental justice. So I think this is a great gatekeeper and a great gate opener to be more inclusive to everyone. And we can frame it like that.
Great, I think that was a really great answer. I don't know, Sabina or Katrina or Ellie, do you all have anything to add to that or personal experience?
Yeah, we were really conscious of including as many voices as possible. And so when we were thinking about signing the pledge, we went to, I think, 3 all-college meetings and kind of spoke to probably 50% of the college, kind of about what it meant to stop using single-use plastics and what were certain things we could do to make things be as accessible as possible to all folks. So for example, with like plastic straws. We haven't completely eliminated straws. We're still having metal and paper straws for those that might need them. And as well as kind of thinking about like ableism, I think we were also super conscious of people's financial limitations, and COA as a school, like as soon as you arrive, you get given a water bottle to ensure that like everyone has a reusable water bottle, and it's not this thing that's like necessarily differentiated between who can afford something or not. So yeah, I think looking at accessibility in a really holistic sense, whether that be like different abilities or dietary restrictions or financial limitations.
Yeah, we have a lot. We try a lot to, how to put it, we try to do the best of our abilities also to work across the groups, because there's so many people who spend their energy on so many good things. So thinking about not only how can we all push our agendas in different ways, but how can we also collaborate on actually succeeding in the things that we do work on. So I know that people come to us sometimes, like now I'm talking about our committee for sustainability. If people have concerns or ideas or things they want to change, they come, and we also, all our meetings are open. So we also every week we share what we're going to talk about, and people come if they have a special interest. And then we will also seek help from other groups if we are unsure about how to go about something. So I definitely think we put a lot of, and I continue to think a lot about how to make sure that all the different groups collaborate instead of just kind of running their own things, if that makes sense. We're better if we collaborate.
Yeah, back to relationship building again. It's been a key point in all of our answers, but again, really all-encompassing answer. Thank you for that. I don't know if Sabina, you have anything to add there?
No, I would just say, I was just going to echo what Sue said about a meeting with, if you have a disabled students committee, that's something that that's like on our, high on our priority list this semester, because I don't think we included ableism in the discussion about which of our targets and demands really, how they affect different folks with different abilities. And so meeting with those committees and really having, collaborative discussions about how to work on a lot of these targets and how to meet them in a way that's, again, if we need to provide exemptions for certain products, providing those exemptions where necessary. So yeah, I would just say meet with all the committees that you can. And also on the environmental justice front, just to touch on a little bit, I think knowing in great detail your waste streams, what communities that every stage of the waste stream is affecting. So meeting with your haulers, going to the recycling facilities, your compost facility, making sure that there's no disconnect between the products that you're pushing or the products that we're pushing versus what the facilities can handle and what they prefer. So just making sure that we're thinking about every stage of and every aspect of this product's life cycle and how that may be affecting communities downstream that aren't necessarily as visible on a campus level.
That's a really great point. Thank you for including that. And then CJ's second question, which is also really great, is how did you all actually make the ask to your college presidents? What was that process like, and any keynotes from that? Let's start with Katrine and Ellie. I know your process might look a little different than most people's.
Yeah, we just gave each other a look because we knocked on his door. We were like, "Hey, Darren, we have something cool to talk about." We're super incredibly fortunate in that our president is alumni of COA and is this incredible guy who worked in the environmental sector before coming and being president of COA, and so yeah, we went straight there, and when it was kind of sidetracked by him doing some fundraising stuff, we kept on knocking, and eventually he remembered and was excited and wanted to be a part of things.
But definitely also, because it's asking how to do it in a virtual way, we've definitely also been persistent. And I think one thing that I'm struggling a lot with these days is that I can't go knock on people's doors because they aren't behind them anymore. And so, because they're at home. And so we've definitely also been challenged by the consistent, as you also mentioned, so the consistent knocking on the virtual doors and being persistent there, because it's harder when you can't be physically present in the same room together. But
Yeah, and another good thing I think for us was having kind of staff and faculty allies on our committee who could also reach out. So it wasn't just coming from a single person and kind of getting lost in the email threads. It was coming from multiple angles with many different perspectives and with different stakes in the process.
Right, we definitely ask for help. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then Sabina, with a school that is much larger.
Yeah, so again, I can't speak exactly to how to go about pitching this policy to administration, but I guess just in terms of implementation, I think it's really important to make sure that you have partners and allies within whatever your environmental department is on campus. And if you don't have one of those, within your, we have a chancellor, your president's advisory committee, making sure that you have partners in sort of those higher level administrative positions that can really provide leverage whenever you're trying to, agree on certain targets or make certain demands. I think it's really important to have those partnerships. So for instance, we receive a lot of guidance from Kira, who's the director of our Office of Sustainability, and also our manager, Lynn, who's our manager of our Cal Zero Waste, which is our sort of waste management department. And I think those are really integral relationships to have, because when we're going to a lot of these, when we're pitching this to, or when we're notifying a lot of different departments and different product sectors on campus about this policy, and they don't necessarily know who I am, they don't know, what even the Student Environmental Resource Center is. I think it just shows a lot to show that you have administrative and institutional support. And I think that goes the same thing for, getting the pledge or policy passed, is making sure that you can find those allies, because I think what has surprised me the most is how many people are actually really encouraged and excited about this policy that I honestly didn't think we're going to be as willing to cooperate and collaborate. So knowing that, yeah, I think people will unexpectedly want to help a lot more than you think they will. So yeah, making those connections early on, and making sure to make those sort of key strategic partnerships early on is really important.
Great, thank you so much. And then Sue, if you also have anything to add on that front.
Yeah, so for us at ESF, we are unique again in that we're all earthy focused. So we're just lucky that our chief sustainability officer is our chief executive officer, is our chief of staff, who reports to the president. So we have this really powerful advocate. But also, even myself, like coming into ESF, that can be really intimidating, because that's a very different power dynamic. Like here I am trying to do some zero waste stuff, and even though we have someone in a position of power who advocates for it, can be really intimidating speaking to that person. And that's me as a staff member. So me as a student, I would have been just like in my little shell, not even sure what to say. So putting my student hat on and looking back at my time, there were probably times when I did try to find like staff or faculty champions and people were willing to work with me, but then maybe I dropped the ball because like maybe I didn't follow up on something I said I would do. And I'm not in any way like judging or saying that's what students do. That's like part of the human condition, right? We get excited. We say, we're going to do this thing. Will you help me? But then we don't hold up our end of the bargain. Like I've definitely done that many times myself. So like a professional goal I set for myself is to do the things that I say I'm going to do, and to keep my energy and be that happy pest that I mentioned before. So even if you have someone who's a powerful ally and advocate, it's also proven that you're going to hold up your end of the bargain, and that you can be someone that they can lean on and rely on too. So I would say it's a two-edged sword there.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I'll just add, we did all of those things at Eckerd, but we also really spent a lot of time finding what would motivate our president, and made sure to incorporate that in our pitch. And so for him, it was finances and marketing. So we really just hit how this would be great publicity for Eckerd and how it would save them money. And we just repeated that over and over again until he understood. So for the sake of time, this will be our last question, and we'll mini rapid fire it, but wanted to ask all of you if you had one piece of advice to give to the folks in the audience who are working on this or considering working on this, what would that piece of advice be? And we'll start with Sabina, if you're ready. I know that's a big question.
Sure, yeah. I guess if I had one sort of piece of advice that's different than anything I've said so far, it's to look to other institutions and other campuses who have similar policies. That's one thing that I think I didn't do enough early on, and now I'm realizing, wow, there are so many other campuses that already have such amazing policies, like College of the Atlantic, or we had a meeting with UCLA that has a 2023 goal of eliminating single-use plastic, and just making sure, that again, we're not reinventing the wheel, and there's already so much amazing work being done, and figuring out how we can utilize that and incorporate that into our own work. So yeah, I would just say make as many of those external connections as you can, because in the long run, it'll really help build your own internal policy and implementation guide.
Great, thank you. And then Sue, your piece of advice.
Yeah, I would say we so often get caught up doing the good work that we do that we don't share our story and tell the data. And that's something I find people really like. If we can give them small snippets, like since we did this, we have had a 46% increase in recycling. Like people want to remember these little facts that they can then share with everyone. So I think that's kind of a pitfall we fall into, is like the big upfront, like we signed this pledge, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, but then we disappear into our planning and implementation hole, and people don't hear from us for a little bit, and then they think we aren't doing anything. So it's just giving myself, like I have calendar reminders, like post this, send out this email, try to present to academic governance. So it's telling the story.
Oh, yes, that's such a good point and a good reminder for me. So thank you. And Katrina and Ellie.
Yeah, I think that was a good reminder for us as well. It's definitely something that we fall short on sometimes. We go away into the woodworks, and definitely keeping the community in the loop is so incredibly invaluable to having a force behind you. Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of actually was to find a good friend or buddy or ally to do this with. Like Ellie and I have made a lot of things happen at COA with other people also, but it's definitely, I think it really, we know different things, and we have different limitations and different places where we know a lot. And I know it's really helpful for both of us to kind of always have each other's back. And that's something that, I don't know, it sounds cheesy, but it's so true. It's really good to have a friend. I also was thinking about, there's no like we did it one way, but we also know that it's so different at so many other schools. So just asking for help, you're welcome to ask us for help also. If there's anything we can do, as you both mentioned, like learning from other colleges is definitely helpful.
Yeah, and kind of with that of it being different, like a different path for each place, we are very interested in kind of the idea of being like inch wide and mile deep, like thinking about this thing like so closely, but going mile deep and understanding all of the systems and people, and like what is at stake when making these decisions and choices, and understanding that, like, yeah, everyone does it differently, and that's okay.
Amazing. Wow. Well, thank you so much to Sabina, Katrina, Ellie, and Sue for all being here. I learned a lot, and I hope this was helpful for everyone in the audience. And good luck to everyone in the audience who's working on Breakthrough from Plastic campaigns now, and good luck to everyone who's doing implementation work. Key takeaways, I guess, are to focus on relationship building, really ingrain yourself in communities, and beware of the film plastics. Those will come and get you. And to reach out to procurement offices and key offices early and consistently. So if you all want to stay in contact with Plan, all this information is on their website. There's a really great tab specifically about the Breakthrough from Plastics Pledge. And then you can also get in contact with Young. So there they are. Be sure to do that. And that is all I have for tonight.
Yeah, I believe Ramiro has one more thing. If he's gonna, there you go.
Yeah, sounds, so thank you, everybody. Young, do you want to stop recording?